Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining our discussion on how diversity, equity, and inclusion drives innovation. My name is Deja Edison. I am a sales development representative here at Miro, as well as the leader of our Black Employee Resource Group. The goal for today's session really is to share some of the best practices and also talk around some of the common mistakes we make in the DE&I space. With that being said, I would love to introduce Alina and allow her to introduce herself.
Hi there, my name is Alina Harper, and I'm the Talent Branding and Programs Manager at Wrike, which is a cloud-based project management solution. I worked at Wrike for about 3 years, and in that time, I've had the pleasure of implementing several different programs, one of which is our Wrike Employee Resource Communities, which encompasses the Women of Wrike group, the Outrikers Network, Rikers of Color, Wrike at Home, the list goes on. I also sit on the talent team, so I help to manage some diversity hiring practices, as well as our university recruiting program, which ties into diversity nicely.
Awesome, and thank you for that introduction to yourself. So jumping right into it, a lot of times, over the years, we've heard things about D&I, and it seems as though this idea of the E or equity is relatively new. And just would like to hear your thoughts on why E is so important, why equity is so important as we're having these discussions.
Yeah, definitely. So I think it boils down to the difference between equity and equality. So equality means that everyone has a seat at the table, whereas equity means providing seats so that everyone has the same view at the table. So if somebody needs a booster seat, providing that booster seat for them. So when you apply that to people or your workforce, equity means providing programs to different underrepresented groups so that everyone has the same opportunities. I think that equality feels good, and equity can be kind of uncomfortable. So, providing mentorship programs for only women employees can raise questions like, why don't I have the same access? I am a woman, so I would have that access, but it can raise questions from other groups as to why don't I have access to that. I think companies are really leaning into that uncomfortable feeling so that they can provide the same opportunities for their underrepresented employees.
Yeah, and I definitely echo that piece. And in hearing what you said, really what I thought about is this idea that just acknowledging certain structures and things that may cause folks to not be encouraged to speak up or not feel that they have the ability to, and just providing the resources in the safe space so that they do feel comfortable. And really, we're all able to work together when that comfortability is there.
Oh, absolutely.
Awesome.
Yeah, totally agree.
Yes. And with that, I know that as we enter and really begin to explore more and more, seeing more companies exploring the DE&I space, without a question, unfortunately, there will be mistakes made, and that just happens. That's a part of the learning process. So, can you speak a little bit more to what are some of the common mistakes that you see companies make with D&I initiatives?
Yeah, I think the most common mistake that companies make is implementing programs without talking to their employees. So, for example, we have a group called the Women of Wrike, abbreviated to WOW. And at its inception, it was a program that was put on by some of our leadership, most of whom were male at the time. They didn't really take any feedback from women, and it wasn't super successful. When I joined Wrike, I didn't even know that it was a thing, that it existed, that it was actually supposed to be a global program. And so when I started getting involved in diversity and inclusion here at Wrike, I was approached by one of our VPs of sales in our Dublin office. Her name is Patricia, and she was awesome. She really wanted to reboot the program and make it accessible to all of our employees. And so we polled our women. We talked to them about what they wanted to see, what they wanted the program to look like, and we relaunched WOW as a global initiative, and now it's active, thriving. All of our offices are involved. We invite women in as soon as they come into the team. It's open to everyone. It is inclusive, but it's definitely focused on providing support for women. And I think that having that group be employee led and employee informed really helps to make it the strong organization that it is. And so we've taken that model and put it across all of our teams or all of our employee resource communities. So the Outrikers Network is something that is led by our LGBT community, not by a member of our HR team. The same goes for all of our other communities as well. I think in addition to that, it's important to have executive sponsorship. So while they should be employee led because they are to support the employees, they need the support from our executive team in order to be successful. So I think those two kind of go hand in hand. If you have them come directly from the executive team, they're not going to be successful. But if you don't have that support at the same time, they won't be successful. So it's kind of a trade-off.
Following up on there, because I've been here at Miro where we do have that executive sponsorship and the buy-in there, but I've also been at companies where executive sponsorship really equaled just giving money. What do you think, from your perspective, kind of what really does that executive sponsorship should entail in order to support the success of those employee resource groups?
I think it's interesting because you do need that monetary sponsorship if you want to have successful events and things like that. However, I think that visibility of having executives at events that are put on by our employee resource communities is so important. Knowing as an employee that your executive supports the initiative that you're putting time and effort into or taking time out of your day to attend, I think is a big deal. So having them be visible, be participating in whatever program you're putting on. For example, we have a guest speaker coming up virtually out of our Melbourne office. And those are through Zoom, so we can see people who are on those Zoom calls. We don't do webinars, we just do regular Zoom calls. And I think it's important to see that though we are all separated, the executives are also taking time out of their day to participate in those events. It helps if they are active members of the community, if they belong to the community that resource community is supporting, and then they can be even further active by like being a speaker or contributing to whatever content you're putting on.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I really heard from that piece, and totally echoing and agreeing with you there, was this idea. Additionally, yes, absolutely, we need the funds in order to host those events, but then that genuine investment and just curiosity, wanting to know more, wanting to be of greater support, potentially leading time around speaking sessions and things of that nature, really, in addition to the funds, helps that employee resource group be successful from their executive sponsor.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for boiling that down into something easily digestible.
Absolutely. So with that said, I know Reich is a remote first company. And with that being the case, do you find that it's easier or harder to, reach DNI initiatives in a remote first environment?
Yeah, so actually Reich was not remote first. We are currently remote because of COVID, but we definitely started in an office. So moving from an office setting into this remote setting has been an interesting problem for us when it comes to supporting our DNI initiatives. So like I mentioned, we are doing virtual events. We have virtual meetups for several of our different employee resource communities, but I think a company would definitely need to work much harder to ensure that any efforts or programs or events related to DNI are visible to all. That's something that we've definitely run into for our programs, now that we've moved to remote, is that, making sure that all of our employees have access, that they know what's happening, that they know what's going on. You have to go beyond the Slack message and into calendar invites and emails, and making announcements at virtual meetings and all of that kind of stuff. So I think it's much harder to make sure that everyone knows what's happening. But at the same time, we do have a lot more access when we're all remote. So as I mentioned, we're hosting a WOW event out of our Melbourne office. And because we're all remote, there's no question that we could attend, given that it's at a time that we could attend, because Melbourne has a crazy time difference. But we're all invited and we all can attend because we're all virtual.
That absolutely totally makes sense. And we have a similar, I think, setup here at Miro as well, where, just making sure you're making the extra effort to invite people, to let them know, this is what we're doing. We would love the participation. And then I think the challenge, of course, as you mentioned with Melbourne, is just having folks globally and trying to align time zones typically ends up being the anchor there. So thank you so much for that. With that being said, how was the transition from, being in the office to now being remote, and adapting to this remote this remote environment, and getting everyone to still have that level of engagement, and feeling comfortable being able to share?
Yeah. So for some of our groups, it was an easier transition. For like the Outrikers Network, for example, we're a fairly small group. There are some members in each office, but it's not very many. So the transition to working remotely was actually easier for us because we had to do virtual events. It was easier to have everyone involved instead of just, the 2 or 3 that are in the San Diego office, or the, 4 or 5 that are in the Dublin office having events on their own. So it was a little bit of a paradigm shift. We were able to meet together and have, mimosas or baby Guinness from the Dublin office together and talk about things that pertain to the LGBT community. So that was really nice. But for our larger groups, like WOW, it was definitely a little bit different. We have a great amount of representation in every single office. So it's easy to put on local events when you're in the office. So moving into a virtual setting was a little bit different. I think initially engagement went down, but it's definitely picked back up. Right now we're in the middle of Breast Cancer Awareness Month, so we're doing some fun campaigns across our teams for, wearing pink and putting on a Zoom background, and it kind of gives us that level of connection that we hadn't had because we moved into a remote setting. In addition to, having those virtual speakers and all of that kind of stuff. So it really it was dependent on the group. For some, a lot easier, for some, but I think it's really about making an effort to connect with those members of the team outside of, the normal working day, which can be exhausting. Zoom fatigue is so real.
Yes, absolutely. Echoing all of that. So I've experienced, I'd say, the highs and lows of it, definitely Zoom fatigue, and just the feeling of like, hey, there's a lot going on. Just trying to get the day started working from home. And then to kind of make sure that you're protecting that time to also engage with your employee resource groups, and having that moment to exhale, if you will. So that's awesome. Thank you definitely for sharing those practices. Kind of moving to our next question. Why is it so important for DE&I to be a priority for companies earlier in their founding?
Yeah, definitely. So I'll speak to the hiring side because that's where I live right now. When I started in diversity and inclusion, we were, a smaller company, just 300 employees worldwide. Now we're at about 1,200 and spread across 10 10 different offices all around the world. So when you start it early, it just makes it easier to maintain as you grow. So one of our main pipelines for gathering talent is referrals. And as humans, we tend to make connections with people who look like us, just subconsciously. It's just a psychology thing. If you have a homogenous workforce, your referrals will also be homogenous. So it's harder to scale when the bulk of your employee base is coming from referrals, because they're going to be the same type of employee that you already have. If you have a workforce already, as you're scaling, get diverse referrals, and then it'll help you maintain that diversity as you scale. So right now we're in the process of opening a brand new office in Dallas, Texas. It's not new. We opened it right before quarantine, but we're still scaling. Nobody's really been in the office yet, so it's a new office. So we're working really hard to make sure that that office starts diverse, so that as we're growing that office, it will continue to be diverse. So it happens every time you open a new office. You got to make sure that it's starting diverse so that it continues to be so. On the inclusion side, when you start early, having inclusive programs for your employees, as you scale, it just becomes second nature. So it's part of your culture. It's part of your structure, having it early as opposed to starting it when you're already 1,200 employees with 10 offices. It's a lot harder to build up that structure when you have that kind of workforce rather than starting it small.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense. And for those organizations who maybe, you know, didn't start when that wasn't a part of their founding, do you have any tips for things that will help them kind of, get ahead of the curve or be able to adjust to that environment now?
Yeah, I think the best place to start is an employee engagement survey. So we run one every single year. We talk about all of the different things that are keeping our Rikers engaged. And I think a good place to start with implementing D&I programs is to ask your employees what they want to see. If you get a good response to your employee engagement survey in regards to diversity and inclusion, then you can talk to those employees and see how you want to go about starting it and bring in a large number of people at the same time. I think it always starts with the employee. It should not be executive led. It should be executive sponsored again, but definitely start with what the employees want, what the employees want to see. That'll be the best place to start. If you're already a large company, you already have a large workforce, and you might want to ask that large workforce what it is they want.
Yeah. That's awesome. So definitely thank you for sharing there. And I think with that piece, that kind of leads into our next question around, you're asking your employees what they want, and really talking about psychological safety. So what does psychological safety mean in the workplace? And do you think it's more important now that we are in this remote setting?
Absolutely. So for us, having psychological safety in the workplace means that there's trust in the leadership and in the company as a whole. It's super important for employee retention and engagement, and is so important in remote work. Without trust in the leadership, it's impossible to build true relationships, particularly as Slack and email leave a ton of room for emotional interpretation. So I think that psychological safety is incredibly important. If you're going to try and build a relationship with your workforce, they have to feel like they can trust you.
I love that piece of leaving room for emotion to come into these conversations that we're having in a very kind of, if you will, objective setting of, hey, I'm slacking you or I'm emailing you versus, us having the conversation via Zoom or anything like that. So with that, I know Miro's real big goal, of course, is to kind of bring that collaboration and that brainstorming piece of everyone being willing to join in and add their ideas. So we definitely understand the piece of psychological safety there. In terms of maybe an instance where that has not been the trend at the company, do you have any tips for how to build that psychological safety where to help folks feel more comfortable sharing, especially in a remote environment?
Yeah, definitely. So it all comes back to the employee engagement survey, right? So we run one again every year. It is anonymous. So we're asking employees anonymously to give us their honest feedback. Um, and the expectation there is that we are collecting feedback to act on it. And I think that building on that if you want to build psychological safety, then you need to listen to your employees and help them to achieve the things that they're looking to achieve. So from that employee engagement survey, you want to move forward with what they're suggesting. If they have an issue, then address it. If there's a common thing in the employee engagement survey that a lot of employees are bringing up, address it. Talk about it in your all hands. Develop programs around that issue. Figure out how to fix it, and show the employees that you're actually listening to them and that they can trust you with their feedback.
Yeah. So really what I got from that piece was one, echoing this idea of making sure that you are reaching out to your employees to hear what they have to say and really honestly considering their voice. And then from there, actually making steps to say, we heard you. And making it known that, listen, we heard you. So, acknowledging it in a public setting, and then talking about the things that are going to be next steps for making changes towards that. Um, I think that's an awesome kind of three-step formula, if you will, though it doesn't always play out like that. With that being said, how do you measure DE&I programs and their success?
Totally. Gonna bring it back again to the engagement survey.
Yeah.
So if people are engaged, if they're happy to work for your company, if your referral numbers, particularly for diversity, are up and you're retaining your employees, you must be doing something right. So when it comes to like ERG engagement, so when we're talking specifically about inclusion, if you have an overwhelming amount of people coming to you for events or speakers, they feel like it's a safe space. And then the employees are driving the development of that ERG or that inclusion program, then it's successful. Then they feel like they can be involved on the inclusion side. So I think that is really a an indicator, of success of the program. I also think that when you have a psychologically safe environment, people can speak up and drive innovation if they have trust in the company that their voice is going to be heard. I think that that's a real way to measure the success of a DEI program.
Yeah. And I think that's awesome. I think speaking to the driving innovation piece, this idea that the door is always open and we will listen to your feedback, definitely allows for diverse, inclusive ideas that to come forward really and be shared in order to further drive that innovation. Things that some of us may have never thought of. Someone else has a brilliant idea and they're just waiting for the opportunity to be seen and heard to feel comfortable sharing it. So thank you so much for sharing that piece. With that, I do want to open it up to see what questions we have from the audience. So I'll kind of pick a couple here. It looks like someone asked, what are some ways you've prioritized DE&I in your hiring process?
Yeah, that's a great question. I can speak directly to our university program because that's like 90% of my job right now. So when we are looking at hiring high potential entry level talent, we definitely want to make sure that we are bringing in a diverse pool of candidates. The best way to hire diversity is to present a big diverse pool to your hiring managers and let them choose the best candidate from there. So one of the ways that we've prioritized that is implementation of new software, making sure that we are targeting specific schools that are either have a large diverse population or they serve underrepresented communities. So that's a really big one for us. Not particularly in the COVID era because university recruiting is crazy right now. But normally we are going out to schools and we're talking directly with students. So making sure that we are choosing schools that support our diversity initiatives is a big one for us. We actually just implemented a program called Jumpstart as part of our hiring initiatives. Jumpstart is a tool that allows us to connect directly with university students and beyond, and build in factors to our application process that helps to support underrepresented communities and people that we might not reach during a normal university recruiting process. So those are just two ways that we're kind of building out diversity on the entry level front. I think it gets a little bit more difficult when you're looking at more experienced employees. So there's a lot more work on the part of the recruiter to bring in that diverse pool of candidates. You have to make sure that you're posting to job boards that support diversity, that you are attending events that are directed to diversity. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. My best source of knowledge is for university. So that is what I'm doing.
Yeah, that absolutely makes sense there. So thank you for sharing that piece. We have a rather popular question. How do the programs differ across countries? How should you adopt depending on country culture?
That's a great question. The best one that I can speak to is WOW. It is our most globally adopted group. And it's interesting because there's not a whole ton of visibility across different regions. So when we're looking at, the US, EMEA, APAC, so context, right, is a little bit regionalized. We have US, EMEA, APAC, we have our Russia region. And so HR for US, EMEA, APAC is one team, and then we have a different HR team for the other region. So it's a little bit different, but everyone is involved in every event that we put on. So when we are putting on an event for WOW, we make sure that it's at a time when everyone can join. Obviously, that gets a little tricky when you're looking at the time changes between Russia and Tokyo. But we always record our sessions. That's a different point. But yeah, things look a little bit different. I think it really depends on how the culture looks in that particular office. But we do have employee leaders in each office running the program according to what they want it to look like. So yeah, it's a little bit different. It's hard to kind of pinpoint what those differences are because we do host large global events, particularly now because we aren't necessarily doing regionalized events. But we do big global things like International Women's Day, our global speakers, things like that. It's a little bit harder to speak to, but I think the best way to account for cultural differences across international offices is to have an employee leader in each office driving that adoption in each office.
Yeah. So really what I heard there was who knows the culture better than folks who are on the ground, really, really working with the culture. So having that availability to folks, central to their location or local to their location, but then also still making sure to host those global events in order to have, the whole community or the whole employee resource group have an opportunity to celebrate together as well.
Exactly. Yes.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Another rather popular question, does or should inclusion cover neurodiversity? And I believe they're
Absolutely.
talking about diversity in thought.
Yes. So I think that diversity covers all kinds of different things. And, it goes beyond what you can see, male, female, race, all of those kinds of different things. So gender, race, all of those different things. There's a ton of different places where we can be diverse. Differences in background. Do you have children or not? Are you a member of the LGBT community? Those are all diversity factors. And every single person that works at a company is intersectional. So, I'm a woman. I'm also part of the LGBT community. I'm also Jewish. So a lot of different things that inform the way that I think and approach problems. And that's the same of every single employee that you have. So I think when we're talking about inclusion, we need to be cognizant that every single person has a different background, has a different way of thinking, has a different way of approaching problems. So I think absolutely, you should be talking about differences in thought, because every single person is thinking differently, and every single person should have a voice to talk about the way that they're approaching problems or wanting to solve for things.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, echoing everything that you said, I think really as we're talking about driving innovation, it's really, in addition to all of this kind of standard diversity factors that we see, it's really also having that difference in thought that allows you to kind of break through, into new innovation, new ideas, and things of that nature. So thank whoever asked that question, and definitely I love your response there. Our next question: what are your thoughts on hiring for culture fit versus culture add?
Yeah, definitely. So Reich is definitely of the opinion that we are hiring for culture add, and that is an initiative that I actually drove when I joined Reich 3 years ago. So culture fit is, again, coming back to that homogenous workforce. If you're hiring for somebody that fits in your culture, then you are promoting the idea of a homogenous workforce. If you already have some people who are this culture and you're looking to fit somebody into this bucket, then you're not going to have a ton of diversity. But if you're looking for somebody who's going to add to the culture, then it kind of promotes the idea that you're looking for somebody who isn't exactly the right fit, but will be somebody who can add to the overall culture. So it's really just a switch in the thinking process for hiring managers, fit versus add.
Yeah.
And it's a way for us to help our hiring managers think about hiring differently. I'm not looking for somebody who's going to fit in this bucket, but is going to, add to the overall water source.
Yeah. I hear you. I hear you there. And follow up question there: what are some of kind of like the things that you would consider, say, non negotiables in terms of making sure someone will, I would say, kind of merge within the culture, but then also still have these extra factors on the outside that will allow them to add to the culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. So when we're hiring at Reich, what we're looking for in terms of cultural questions are people who uh, espouse our values. So our values at Reich are grow, collaborate, execute. So we want somebody who has a growth mindset. They're always looking for the next thing. We want somebody who's collaborative. We're a collaboration software platform. Like, if you can't work on a team, what are you doing? And then we want somebody who's going to come in and work really hard, because we're all dedicated to the success of the company. And so we want people who are going to be the same in their drive to see the success of the company. Beyond that, when it comes to culture, we're not looking for anything specific. That's the real driver is our values. So I think when you're looking at culture add versus culture fit, you definitely want somebody who is going to adhere to your values. But other than that, I think all the cards can be on the table, or all bets are off. So if you have a homogenous workforce and you're looking to diversify, definitely do that. But definitely also take a look at your values and make sure that that's not driving that homogenous workforce.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I love this idea of, we share the same values, but maybe everything else about, different employees at the company is different. And that's an awesome space to work in, really. So thank you for sharing that piece. The next question that we have: the leadership in my company is overwhelmingly white men. What can I do to change this? What can I do as an individual to change this? There we go.
That's a really great question, and also a really hard one to answer, particularly from somebody who manages the university program at a company. But when I joined Reich, our executive team was overwhelmingly male as well. And it was, as a young woman coming onto the team, it was a little bit disheartening not to see myself represented on the executive team. So it is something that we, over the course of 3 years, we've worked really hard as a broader HR team and a recruiting team to make sure that we are, when we have space on our executive team, that we are driving that diversity there. So it's something that has to come from the top down. We had support from our vice president of HR, who was a badass woman. Excuse me. She was amazing. She's no longer with the company, but now we have a CHRO who is a member of the LGBT community. So it's nice to see that representation there. We have a female CFO, and when those spots opened, it was definitely something that was top of mind, was to hire for a little bit more diversity on our executive team and make sure that it wasn't all white men. So that is a big thing. So I think as an individual, raising that concern to your HR team, if you have if you know of other employees who have the same concerns, make your voices heard. If you work in a psychologically safe environment, they will hear your voice and hopefully help you to act on it.
Yeah, and I think you brought up a great point in helping to kind of answer that question at the end too, in terms of if you're working in that safe environment and you feel like you can voice, make yourself, make your opinion and the opinions of your coworkers known and heard, and give your leadership an opportunity to address it and see if they can do something about it. So thank you so much for that one. The next question we have: many organizations are diverse but struggle with the inclusion side. What three tips can you give to foster inclusion culture?
Yeah, definitely. So let me just collect my thoughts. So number one, if you're part of the HR team and you're not doing an engagement survey, that is the best way to kind of pull your employees to see what they're looking for in terms of inclusion, because it's anonymous. You can gather a ton of feedback. If you're not on the HR team and your HR team is not doing an engagement survey, definitely suggest it. Say, hey, there are some things that I'd like to implement. And I think, I have a lot of agreement from the employee base. Maybe we could run a survey and see if there's something, that we can align on. So that's the first step. I think listening to your employees, or, encouraging your executive team to listen to their employees is a big one. Once that happens, you can find common ground with a lot of different employees, and talk about those things during meetings. So if you have an overwhelming response that you want a female-focused group or a women-focused group, you can suggest that in a meeting. Call for volunteers to help start it. We have right now. We are starting the planning process for our official Rikers of Color group, which is awesome. But they are just in the stages where they're meeting with volunteers and planning how they're going to run the event. So gathering volunteers is a huge one. You want to make sure that it's employees, that you have a lot of different types of ideas coming in. Make sure that even within the diversity group, the ideas are diverse. So that's a big one. Ask for volunteers. And number three, find an executive sponsor. So it doesn't have to be a member of your C-level team. It could be a vice president, a director. Just make sure that you have somebody who is going to be your voice with the executive team, so that you can make it an official inclusion group. And that will help. So yeah, those are my three big points. Hear what your employees want, get volunteers, get a sponsor.
Yes. I love the echoing of hear what your employees want. I think sometimes, we overthink to some degree, DE and I, and realistically, a lot of the answers can be sitting with the employees in terms of what they would like to see. So the answers sit with the people, if you will. So thank you so much for emphasizing that. Our next question: what types of initiatives do your companies, Miro or Reich, help do to help everyone understand the need for DE&I programs still today?
That's a great question. And I think in this environment, at least in the US, I think the need for DE&I programs is very clear. Just with everything that's going on in the world, our employees need to feel supported on every level. Not only are we all working from home in a pandemic, it's scary. There's a lot of racial injustice happening, especially in the U.S. right now, and I think that doesn't exist in a bubble. That comes into the workplace as well. So I think just living in the world emphasizes the need for DE&I programs. But as to what we're doing in our workplace, we talk about what's happening in the world. Back in June, when a lot of the protests erupted, we talked about them in our all hands and our U.S. team meetings. We emphasized that if you need help, if you want to talk to our HR team, you can. We have resources for that as well. But I think that just talking about what's happening in the world, talking about all of the differences that we have as employees, just doing that emphasizes the need for DE&I programs.
Yeah, I would absolutely echo you 110% there. I think just this idea of bringing it up and us acknowledging that there's more going on in the world that may be impacting our ability to do our jobs on a day-to-day basis is so important, because I think it stops us from feeling crazy about the fact that we are impacted by these things. And that might be a personal thing for me, but that there's an impact for all of these things happening in the world. And then I'm sitting in my room trying to make sure that I'm also getting my job done in a virtual environment where it's just difficult already to collaborate with my coworkers and customers and things of that nature. So 100% echoing there. And at Miro, we're having conversations like this at conferences, making sure that DE&I is still at the forefront of the conversation within the Black ERG that we have here at Miro. It's just hosting the conversations, having the space to say, hey, we know that we're still seeing videos of police brutality on the screen on the news, and it's still having an effect on us. Let's have a conversation about it. So, yeah, I completely echo that idea of talking about it. So thank you to whoever asked that question. Next question we have here: would you prioritize inclusion efforts at a company over diversity hiring efforts?
That's a great question. I don't know that I would. I think that they are. This is my personal opinion. I think that they go hand in hand. If you are not hiring for diversity, then you can't have an inclusive environment. Just period. So if you are a diverse company and you're already hiring from referrals and you have a diverse pipeline coming in, if that's organic to your company, then absolutely focus on inclusion programs. But if it's not, I think that they are equally important. So I don't think that I would prioritize one or the other unless you already have an active machine running to bring in from the outside.
Yeah. And I totally echo there. As a leader of one of the ERGs, I think that's something that we're always discussing is, hey, the reality of the situation is for anyone, if you hear one person raising their hand saying this is an issue, you're like, okay, nice to know. If you hear 10 people raising their hand saying this is an issue, that creates some extra urgency to say, like, oh, well, clearly it's not just one person's opinion, there's multiple people. But if you don't have
Mm-hmm.
the 10 people at the company to raise their hand, then it's impossible for it to happen. So totally echoing your sentiment of that those two things go hand in hand. We have another question. What types of initiatives we answered that one already. Moving forward. What can an employee do to foster greater DE&I in their team, if not their director slash manager, hiring manager, etc.?
Again, I would talk to people. It's when you're an individual employee and you're not part of the HR team. If you maybe don't have a direct line to an executive to be a sponsor, if you're looking to foster a culture of DE&I within your own team, talk to your team, see what it is that they prioritize, what they think is important, and take the conversation from there. I think there's uh, a culture of not talking about these things that is still persistent even in this time when DE&I is very important. But if it's not coming from your HR team, if it's not coming from your executives, if it's not something that you guys talk about on a regular basis, talk about it. Mm-hmm. It's so important to talk about these things and just see what's important to your team. That's the biggest piece of advice that I can give is talk about the issues and have these conversations. Get past that culture of not talking about it.
I hear you. Do you find any tips to be useful in the event where you're talking about a global space, or really trying to get the other person or the rest of the team, your organization, to really understand why it's important for you all to have these initiatives? Seems to be an uphill battle. Not necessarily that people don't care, but they just are having a hard time understanding, what the challenge is, what's the issue. Do you have any tips for allowing your voice to be heard in those spaces, or resources, articles, or anything like that, that helps to kind of show the benefit of having DE&I in the workplace?
Yeah, definitely. So when we were implementing the overarching Reich Employee Resource Community Program, WOW had already been super successful. It was a thriving community. We wanted to expand and start the Outrikers Network, which again was employee led. I am a member of the LGBT community, so it wasn't coming from HR, but we wanted to start it. And we wanted it to be part of a broader program that was employee led and inclusive and all of that kind of stuff. So we obviously had to present that to our executive team and make sure that we had buy-in from them. So putting together that ask was really driven by data. We were looking at numbers. We were presenting articles and resources. This is several years ago, so all of that data would be out of date. But our CEO is driven by numbers. He loves seeing hard data, especially when it comes to recruiting. And bringing that back into inclusion is actually a little bit difficult because measuring something numerically when it comes to diversity and inclusion is difficult. It's hard. So doing the research and finding those numbers as to how it can help us be a more successful company was really important for our executive team. So I would say, figure out what's important for your executive team. If you are presenting some kind of program that you want to get past them, you want approval on, figure out what's important to them. Show them the data on it. If that's what's important, show numbers, find the numbers, do the research, and it'll help kind of move it forward. But you need to speak to what they think is most important. So for our CEO, it was, how is this going to help us be a more productive company, and what is the data on that?
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I've experienced that, at other companies where folks are data driven, and that's actually, I think, part of the neurodiversity, if you will, is just us conceptualizing things differently. So making it make sense, for others, and how it can help improve the culture at the company. So thank you for that. We do have a couple more questions. So the next one: how do you approach employees who do not see the value in D&I? The larger number of cis white males in tech often are irritated at DE and I initiatives. So I think that does touch on a little bit what we discussed, but if you could kind of touch on overcoming the irritation or that discomfort that sometimes comes along with bringing up DE and I initiatives.
Yeah, definitely. And that's a difficult one. I think, as organizations, we have to lean into what's uncomfortable. And I think a lot of people are learning that that's important, especially in this time period, where people are learning about, you know, inequalities for the first time, and learning about privilege for the first time. And it's uncomfortable and it's not a fun conversation to have, but, we have to lean into that discomfort and learn from it. So I think overcoming that discomfort from white cis men on a team, can be very, very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for everyone to have pushback on something that you think is so important, which is so important. And I think it's hard to kind of figure out a way to push through it. I think it really speaks to every individual person and seeing what's going to resonate with them. So, finding what will resonate them in terms of like, why is this important? It might not be important for you, but it's important for me as a woman to have the same opportunities that you have as a man. Um, and I think that, finding what's going to resonate with that person and, making them understand in that way it's hard. I'm not going to lie. It's very hard, but finding it and pushing through it is going to be the only way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I could add my own tip here, I think one of the things I find really useful is finding videos of folks talking about it and saying, "Hey, like I would like to show you this video around, you know, this particular concept and why it's important. I recognize that I have a lot of emotions tied to the value of this, and I may not be conveying it to you in a way that helps transcribe to you. So we had we call ourselves Black Mirrorneers, RERG here at Miro. And we showed a video of Robin DiAngelo speaking about white fragility and why it's just so important to have that lens as you're engaging in the group and with the group and creating that safe space. So that would be my kind of tidbit of advice is to find someone who maybe is a slightly better at articulating the words for you that might be able to convey the value and share it with those folks and see if it resonates.
Yeah,
Awesome.
definitely.
Go ahead. Yeah, I think
Oh,
so. Our next question. No, go ahead. Were you going to say anything else?
no, it's
Sorry.
okay.
Okay. Our next question, employee engagement surveys are often not of interest or employees may not feel comfortable answering honestly. Other suggestions for employee engagement? Question mark.
That's a great question. And it's a hard one for me to answer because I'm not part of the HR team. I work very closely with the HR team, particularly on diversity and inclusion issues. But I am not part of the HR team, so I don't drive the employee engagement survey. Um, but what you're saying is absolutely right. If you don't work in an environment, if you don't have an environment where employees feel safe sharing their opinions, um, or if you are working in an environment where employees are giving their feedback, but it's not being acted upon, that can create an environment where they don't want to share, where they're not going to share. So that's a great question, and I apologize. I really don't have an answer for that one because we do run an employee engagement survey and we do have great response from it. One of the things that we were doing early on to drive adoption of the engagement survey was to, I know this sounds not great, but it was to incentivize employees
Yep.
to take the survey. It's anonymous. We emphasize that it is anonymous, but we incentivize our employees to take the survey by, number one, running a competition for take rates. So
Okay.
per office, if you had a 90% survey take rate in your office, then you would get a great reward for the office itself. And then so that in that way we could get 90% of our employees to take the survey. We no longer do that because we have a culture where employees feel encouraged to take the survey. But yeah, I don't have a great alternative for an employee engagement survey, and I apologize for that.
Yeah. Thank you for your honesty, I would say, for sure, with that piece. And the other thing, I think that just echoes the importance of psychological safety, because when you have that trust kind of undergirding the overall organization and the culture, it definitely allows for the space of engagement and in those surveys. The other pieces I've definitely seen also incentives at other companies as well. We did do an engagement survey here at Miro. It was not incentivized, but we all, contributed. And I think Andre actually did a really great job of just reaching out to say, hey, I would love to hear, what you all have to say, and making that message very personalized. That encouraged us to really feel comfortable sharing. But I've seen things like gift cards or things of that nature for, raffle gift card for folks who want to engage in that survey. So thank you so much for your honesty there. And I do think it's a great challenge if you're not able to do that. I think we only have time for one more question. With that, this is the last one. So why do success metrics KPIs look like? I think they might have said, what do success metrics and KPIs look like for DE&I work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And again, I'm not part of the HR team, so I can only speak to the recruiting side. And we don't actually have solid numbers on what we're looking at when it comes to recruiting, because we don't want to put a numerical value on hiring for diversity. However, we do have metrics surrounding the way that we target diversity candidates. So for university, we have a certain number of schools that we target based on serving underrepresented communities. So again, we're opening we've opened an office in Dallas. It's new. We're hiring very quickly there, and that's where the focus is. So the schools that I'm targeting surrounding the Dallas area, either number one, have to have some great numbers on student diversity, or they need to be an HBCU or a women's college or what have you. So I do have a certain number of diverse universities that I'm required to target per season. And then we also have some metrics around bringing in diversity on, when you get further into the interview process. In our Dublin office, we are not allowed to hire for a role until we've brought in at least one female candidate, which is very low. And we do that every time. And we hire great diversity in our Dublin office, but we are not allowed to hire or make an offer to any candidates until we've brought in a female candidate to interview in person.
Wow.
So yeah, it's very strict. So that's kind of the way we manage making sure that our pools are diverse, having KPIs on the actual hiring process as opposed to hiring diversity. In that way, the recruiting team can kind of control, I guess, the way that our pipelines look and the pools that we're presenting to our hiring managers so that they can move diversity through the pipeline as well. But again, we don't have any set numbers on how many candidates need to be from which populations, because we don't feel that that's the right way to handle things. As far as inclusion goes, I actually can't speak to those KPIs. Our ERGs are employee led, so it's kind of up to the employees what those look like.
Okay, I'm not sure if we lost her, but thank you all so much for attending the session. Great talk, and thank you so much to Alina for her input, and thank you all so much for the questions that you offered today.